Today we're going to really dive into what we both know is a very important topic, and that's awareness and just the importance of keeping the options of our, in this case, insulin, our medical tools and the things that we need to survive available for us, especially insulin. Insulin is just, there's so many different avenues around insulin, as we know, so how important it is. So you're going to come in and you're going to explain it. So explain or share your association with type 1 diabetes. So why is this something that you have such a big heart around?
So I have a daughter. She's now 16. When she was 13, she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Came completely out of the blue for us, like it does for everyone. That's why I'm in this world. We, within a few months, got her on a specific insulin that works great for her called Levemir insulin. And then we learned a year and a half ago that this would be discontinued from the US market and eventually from the world market. And so I definitely have a personal interest, but in the last year and a half, I've been connected to many who need this insulin.
Yeah. So she's 16, and gosh, and that's another whole area of life and stages. I was diagnosed at 14, and so I understand. But back in those days, I'll call it those days because that was 1982. It was there was the pork and beef insulin. So again, we didn't have many choices. The insulin pump was not really quite available yet. I think they were just starting to kind of get those big blocks of pumps that they were like a brick, I think, just the initial ones. So we were still doing vials of insulin and syringes. So that's the way I drew up my insulin. And it was cloudy and clear, all the different things. But it's amazing. I mean, we have come so far with not only the tools to administer insulin, the therapy tools, the pumps, in the different ways. Gosh, they're coming up with even more as we speak, right? And that's something else we're going to dive into today. Is really what the medical and the pharmaceuticals and these supply companies, what they're spending time and energy on. And, of course, we all have opinions as to what they should spend more time on. But ask me, any day of the week, and it may change. But that's just, that's just kind of the process of living with this disease. So we're going to be talking today about Levemir insulin. And as we are talking, we're going to talk about, there are a couple different long-acting insulins now available. So I think it's important for us to, as we're talking, and we're talking about this one specifically, that we understand the different types so that we can compare and contrast, what's available and maybe, the benefits of such and how they compare with one another. So I'm going to pull up a graphic that you shared with me and the listeners here. So if you're watching us on YouTube, you're going to have a chance to see the graphic. Otherwise, if you're listening, that's fine too. We are going to talk through the 3 basal insulins. So I'm going to leave that to you, Alison, if you want to walk us through the 2 different or the.
Yeah, thank you. So 3 types of long-acting insulin. If someone is diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and interestingly, these are the same options for those with gestational diabetes, with type 2 who need insulin. Not included on this graph is NPH, which is technically an intermediate insulin. It's not seen as a realistic option for most with type 1 diabetes. It is used sometimes in the gestational type or diabetes community, and it is used by some with type 1 diabetes, just not as often. So the 3 main basal insulins they have 2 names. There's the generic name and then there's the trade name. So Novo Nordisk is the sole manufacturer of 2 of the 3. So even though there's a generic name and a trade name, it's all made from the same company, Novo Nordisk. And those are the 2 on either side. The shortest acting of the long acting is Detemir, which we know as Levemir. 1 injection of this lasts 8 to 14 hours. That's a big unique quality of this one. It's honestly, some people have not liked it for this reason, but others love it. The fact that it drops off pretty quickly after 8 to 14 hours depends on the person and it depends on the dose. And then the other one that Novo Nordisk makes is the one on the right, which is Tresiba. Or Degludec is the generic name for that one. And that one shot of that one lasts approximately 42 hours. People still take this one every day, but you don't see a change as quickly. The awesome thing about Levemir is you see a change quickly. So you can change the amount. It's very flexible. The main insulin is the middle one. That's the one made by other manufacturers. It's glargine, most commonly known as Lantus, but a lot of people will know it by Basaglar, Semglee, Resvoglar. Tuheo is extra strength. All of those are glargine. And interestingly, the three manufacturers of insulin have dominated the market for several decades: Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly, and Sanofi. There are new players coming into the market. We know of 7 companies who are bringing insulin manufacturing to the market. Biosimilars. Biosimilar is another word for generic. All of those companies are working on some combination of only glargine and then 2 fast-acting insulins, which we won't get into today. But the ones they're working on are Aspart and Lispro, which is the generic name for Novolog and Humalog. So if we don't succeed with keeping Levemir on the market, we could be looking at a future of only glargine, because there's no guarantees with Tresiba either. Novo Nordisk is the sole manufacturer of that, and it's still on patent. Levemir is now off patent. As you know, Novo Nordisk also makes Ozempic and Wegovy, which are much more lucrative. They're shifting to a weight loss drug company, and they are making pretty strong statements that they're phasing out of their mature brands of insulin. So that's kind of a brief rundown of the main 3.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I continue to learn as well. It's interesting because we get kind of rooted in what we use. And generally speaking, the insulins we're talking about are long acting. They're basal. So and again, generally speaking, those of us who are on pumps, unless you take a pump break, which I do sometimes, this conversation may not apply to you. But that doesn't mean one day you won't be MDI, that you won't go back to multiple daily injections. So I think it's just really important. And you said something very exciting, that there's other companies that are getting into this field and studying and learning more about how they can, I guess, again, I don't know all the terms, kind of biologically create something that's going to help our body. And we talk a lot here about hormones. And one of the things that you mentioned that stood out to me as well is how advantageous Levemir is for women with gestational diabetes. And again, this is not anybody, generally speaking, again, it's not type 1 women. This is gestational diabetes. So that's a different diagnosis when insulin resistance kind of kicks up during that pregnancy. And of course, type 2. So that's another segment that really sees benefits from using this insulin. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what would you say if you can, and this is something I want to remind everybody here, neither Alison and I are doctors or scientists. We are coming from really, obviously, patients and studiers and researchers in this field. So what we bring to you today is things we know and we've studied and have been shared by the company. So just to say that, just to have that cleared. As far as Levemir, what makes it unique?
This is my favorite topic. So most are given glargine when they're first, or Lantus, when they're first diagnosed. Right. If there's some reason people don't tolerate it or want to try something different, that's usually when people switch to either Tresiba or Levemir or a pump. And just to put out there, it used to be, well, everyone can use a pump. There's a wider understanding now that even pump users need a backup. There are a lot of reasons why some people might need to go off of a pump for a while. The newly diagnosed are on injections. Those with gestational diabetes would almost never use an insulin pump. So we can't get rid of the option of long-acting insulin. But back to what makes Levemir unique. So the main one is its shorter time of action, which makes it more flexible. And when I say flexible, so teenagerhood that I'm dealing with my daughter is a little bit similar to perimenopause and menopause that you're talking about, which is so valuable. Some of our most vocal helpers on the movement to keep access to Levemir are in that stage of life. And I have many beyond that stage of life who have said, I could not have gotten through menopause without Levemir. And pregnancy isn't, so periods of time of life where your insulin needs change quickly, where your hormones are in fluctuation, are times when people really appreciate Levemir. There's also teenagers, boys with growth hormones. Often there are a lot of boys who use Levemir who use double or even triple the amount of Levemir in the day versus the night, and vice versa. You can't do that as easily with glargine or with Tresiba.
Right, right.
So you can just, some of them, honestly, they get used to taking this dose that is 2 or 3 times in the day and the night, and you can see that difference. So when people use pumps, they often see you have it set up to give a different settings, different times of day. Levemir, it kind of acts like that. It acts like a pump where you can really titrate it to that different amount needed.
I like that analogy. Yes, yes. And I'm very visual, so I'm kind of, visualizing this with my own new pump settings, because I'm new on a pump. I was MDI for 42 years. And I finally, and I don't mean that I was like resistant, but I did switch over to the Omnipod 5 just about a year ago. One thing that you mentioned too that I think, could you give us generally speaking, Levemir is a split dose based on the fact that, because ideally basal is to give us continuous background insulin, which is what's nice about, say, Tresiba, because I was always a Tresiba fan. It worked well for me. But what's interesting is too, because I'm going to back up to your daughter, has she tried any other insulin?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I think that's what maybe the listeners are going to maybe wonder, and I wonder this myself. Did she noticeably, was it very obvious to her, again, at her age, at her newly diagnosed stage, which is another part of it as well, because sometimes when we're newly diagnosed, the C-peptide, there could still be some pancreatic action going on. Or women, or I should say anybody that is in that early stage, so that late adult onset, where there's still a little action going on with the pancreas, which makes it even harder. Because it's not an all or nothing, you're not necessarily all in the driver's seat when it comes to your dosing decisions, but hormone changes is very similar. So what did your daughter experience with that?
So she used Lantus at first, and it was switched to Semglee. She went back again on Semglee and actually Basaglar. It was about 1.5 years ago for a while. For us, it's just harder. It felt stickier. It was harder to move. So she's also, in addition to being a teenager, she's an athlete. She plays tennis almost every day. So she really wants to have this blood glucose in a pretty tight range so she can always be ready to go out and play. She's had very little disruption to her tennis playing from type 1 diabetes. And it's partly due to the flexibility of Levemir. She's also tried an insulin pump. She did it for 3 months and it worked fine during the week. She found in her case it was difficult on the tennis tournament weekends where you're outside sweating in the sun, and your matches can be an hour or several hours. And her blood glucose was harder to control than what she was used to with Levemir. So she's tried the options, except she hasn't tried Tresiba. Our bottom line is just that there ought to be options. If we don't succeed with this, it's just, we're nervous that there's a world where there's just 1 or 2 options, which...
Yeah, it's that's such a great point too. And diabetes is not a one size fits all. Our dosing, our choices of insulin and tools is not a one size fits all. So she's in a stage right now. She's very active. It kind of reminds me of my husband too, because he's all about trying a pump, but his lifestyle, he's in and out of the water. Like, it's too much stress to try to keep it on, to try to keep it working continuously. And we don't need more stress. So we want something that we know is going to fit in with our lifestyle, give us what we need. 80, there's an 80-20 rule there. I don't think any of us expect perfection, but we want consistency and something that we can lean on, and confidence that in this case, something that is working so well for her won't be taken away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I can add, there are some other differences in addition to the duration that affect some people more than others. So Levemir is the one you can dilute. So there are small children who I talk to parents who their child they're eyeballing less than half of a unit on a syringe. And sometimes for tiny children, that can be too much. So sometimes they'll try and not give that amount and watch what happens, and the blood glucose goes too high. But then they give that amount of basal and it's too low. So if they have the ability to dilute it, then it's much more precise. And it's pretty widespread. There are communities that know how to do that. In one of my meetings I've been meeting with Senate offices for a year and a half. One of the Senate aides who was a physician, it was Senator Markey of Massachusetts. His aide was actually a physician. She was a child psychiatrist. She said, I have personally diluted Levemir or Detemir for my inpatient psychiatric patients, for several of them who had type 1 diabetes. They were small and they needed just this small amount. And then another thing, just to mention that how you said it's a split dose, there are some people who only use Levemir once a day.
Okay.
The population for that would be some with gestational diabetes, only need insulin at night. But I've also talked to women with LADA who are diagnosed in their 40s and 50s who say, I only need my Levemir at night. So that tells you that they probably only need that insulin at night. So if we're taking away that option for this insulin that covers that right amount of time, that's a little bit frightening.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. And again, we should have choices, and yeah, I'm so happy to bring this, just this awareness, this is something I wasn't quite aware of as well. And not to mention Levemir in general. I have had some clients over the years that have used Levemir and never really understood the differences, to be honest, because, that's not how I work as a coach. It's not my job to tell them to use different insulins. All I can do is talk about, the one I love and maybe talk to their doctor about it. But I wonder if patients themselves, when they are being prescribed, whether it's Lantus, Tresiba, Levemir, if they understand why and how that particular insulin is going to work for them. Because I'm all about understanding. I think there's a wall there as far as what the doctors will share with us or can share with us or take the time to, but it is really understanding. But that could be part of the frustration of trying to, get that time and range dialed in. Mm-hmm. Not knowing that it could be the basal insulin. Exactly. Again, you got to look at the root, you got to look at all of what's happening, how your body's responding, and if there could be another option. So I like that idea too. So are doctors in general, what's your experience? Do you think practitioners are educated on the different types? When they decide on what to prescribe for their patients, is this something, yeah.
You brought that up. There is a wide variation. So doctors have been forced to prescribe whatever insulin someone's insurance will pay for. And the FDA has even basically said they're interchangeable. That's our biggest problem. Right. I have another meeting. I'm going back to DC again next week to meet with HHS. And the biggest problem for us has been that the FDA and many physicians don't understand the differences and say, oh, whatever your insurance prescribes for you is fine, which is a real problem. And I know that when you were first diagnosed and it was animal insulin, things were different then. One thing that was good then was that there was more choice. There were some different options of strength of the animal insulins, and there was pork insulin versus beef insulin. And I've talked to people who said it was easy to go get my insulin. It didn't require a prescription in many states.
That's true.
Right. Or insurance coverage, and they could take care of themselves and make choices. And that a lot of that has been taken away. And so there's less of a knowledge from even the medical community of the specific differences between the different insulins. But some physicians very much do understand the difference. Another Senate aide I met with, it was Senator Marshall's aide. She was a physician also, and she was an emergency room physician. And she said, Levemir is my favorite when a child came into the emergency room if we didn't know what their dose of insulin was. Because if you get, especially with a child, if you get the dose not quite right, it's nice to know that in this shorter amount of time you can change it.